Faith, by its definition, by its own word, is not covered as it is in the New Testament, because by the time you get to the New Testament, the concept and the word has been established. The Old Testament is talking about the physical manifestation, and that's something we talk about in Romans and Hebrews as well. It's the physical manifestation of that faith. You're doing these laws. They're just part of who you are. They're part of the way you think. And we'll get into that. So, so these are the things that Moses is contributing to his people and their future. All of these laws, and he's, like I say, he knows he's not going to be with them much longer, and so he's writing Deuteronomy, and he's gathering them up to get them to this spot. So in Deuteronomy itself, we see that it's divided in my mind in three main sections. The first 11 chapters are reminders. 12 through 28 is more about directives. Well, now that you know these things, here's what you need to do. Here's a law. That means you do this. You do this. Remember these other things and do them. And then 29 through 34 are these final declarations. And he's trying to fight what he finds the people do quite often, which is they accuse God. They accuse God of doing things all the time. Why did God bring us out here? Why would he, why don't we have water? And, why would God do this? We remember the food we used to have, and now we have to eat this manna every day, instead of saying, thank you for the manna. And of course, God says, okay, I'll give you enough quail. It'll be coming out your nose, all right? That's whatever. He was kind of upset with them. So so we're still in this section where he's reminding them of things. Chapter 1, he goes through some of their history up to the point where he talks about the spies and their failure to have faith in God. He doesn't say faith, but that's what he's talking about. Chapter 2, he relates that there were certain people that you were not to touch. Leave the Moabites alone, leave the Ammonites alone. These are the descendants of Esau and Lot. They're your relatives, so just don't touch them. Chapter 3 is kind of the contrast to chapter 1, where he talks about the defeating the Anakim, defeating the giants in the land, which was what scared them so much as spies. They were afraid of these giants, which I tried to relay how tall that would be in our heights today. I mean, imagine somebody who's 10 foot tall and you're going to go fight him. With a sword. That would just, of course, we know David had that faith, but that, if you're a soldier, even a trained soldier who could hamstring somebody, that would be about the only way you could do that. And then chapter 4 last week, or maybe the week before even, he gets into reminding them about what happened about a month before this. Remember when you were at Baal Peor, which is a mountainous region. And they started committing idolatry in different ways, which already these were the people going into the land, and that had to concern Moses so much. 24,000 people died because of that, and God took them. And be on your guard is really one of these many threads, like what Paul does, maybe not as much as Paul. There are several threads. There are statutes, commands, and witnessing. There's covenant, the covenant that God is dealing with them. Not only the covenant that Abraham got, but now this other covenant. We're going to talk about that today. He tells them to listen, to take heed and pay attention, to remember the things that you saw. And so, again, he's really laying out the case so that if they themselves disobey, they or if they try to accuse God of everything, they don't have a case again. There's no case. You saw God do stuff. You saw him. Remember that. He's really trying to get this across them. Jehovah did all these great things. So that pretty much brings us up to speed to where we are today. And it is a good starting place where he gets into the Ten Commandments, which was kind of the beginning of everything. When you think about it, it's the beginning of a whole new paradigm for the Jewish people. Abraham knew that he was being blessed by God, and that through him all the nations would be blessed. But he didn't understand the level of which God was going to have to deal with the people that come from him. And so now this is Moses doing that. So we are in chapter 5. So instead of reading through the whole thing, we're just going to take the questions and then address them. Did anybody read through this and have any main points or anything they wanted to bring up, or anything that stood out that maybe you had a question about before we begin? Okay. It's just, in my mind, this is basically Moses going over the Ten Commandments, and he does it for good reason, but we'll get into that. What are the directions given before Moses declares the covenant to the people? And that's in verses 1 through 5. And what does Moses remind the people about? And he says, and I'm reading from a literal translation here. Moses called to all Israel and said to them, "Hear, Israel, the statutes and the ordinances which I speak in your ears today. And you shall learn them and shall take heed to do them. Jehovah, your God, cut a covenant with us in Horeb," or Mount Sinai. "Jehovah did not cut this covenant with our fathers, this covenant, but with us. These here today, all of us alive." Like how he reiterates that a couple of times. "Jehovah talked with you face to face in the mountain, out of the midst of the fire. I stood between Jehovah and you at that time to declare to you the word of Jehovah, for you were afraid from the face of the fire. And you did not go up into the mountain when he spoke." So what are they supposed to do here? But the question is, what are their directions here? And what does he remind them about?
First of all, he calls them all together.
Okay. Learn them and do them. Yeah. Learn them and do them. And this is a repetitive thread we're going to see through all of this, is listen, take heed, hear. Yes.
Some of them might have been the people refused to go in. They were like told all this.
Yes. And that's another thread. Another thread that Moses puts in there is the concept of teach your sons and your sons' sons. Robin, did you have something? Okay. Well, is that any different from us? Yeah. Okay. And it was new. That would be interesting. It would have been like us living in the time of Christ, hearing the gospel for the first time, right? This is a gospel when you think about it. Dave. I'm good with that. Okay, and then Kay.
Like that. And a lot of things in life are that way.
Right.
Guidelines and suggestions. This is a covenant, and a covenant from God that he declared.
Vassal? That's the one I remember. I couldn't remember the other ones. But yeah, so it's a covenant that God is saying, here's the stipulations for the covenant. You don't have the choice to do them or not in order to understand as far as the blessings of the covenant. If you decide not to do it, the covenant's broken, right? Okay. Okay, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, he made this covenant with the,
Right.
not with the Gentiles. These never applied to them. You have to keep the Sabbath. If you're a Gentile, you never kept it.
Yeah, I agree. But the Sabbath has a very interesting purpose. That I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, all of these things, in a technical sense, according to Romans, are not bound on us. But there are some things that we, as the whole reason for obedience, the same purpose behind what Sabbath did, and we'll talk about that, still applies today. And we'll talk about all of that, the technicalities of it, and what, maybe it's not so technical anymore. So, which is probably more important. Yeah, just kind of going what you were talking about, Danny, as well. I've marked up what I saw important, and this is Jehovah your God cut the covenant. He's relating everything back to God. And it's almost like, maybe it's a good thing that Moses isn't going into the land with them, because, there could have been this issue of elevating Moses beyond what he should have been. And he says, Jehovah speaks these words in 22, and 23 says, when you heard. So he's talking about God dealing directly with them. 24, you said, but your God has made this. God speaks. If we hear your God, all the flesh that has heard the voice. So we see these physical things happening with these people, which we don't get this. And we'll get into the importance of that, especially God choosing a people who keep good records. Why that's so important? Because we have a physical manifestation of God, and that we can't miss that. And this is something that most people who don't believe in God, that's the first thing they try to go after, is the Mosaical writings. Because if the Mosaical writings are true, this is a historical document. What are you going to say against it? There's nothing you can't say. Okay. This idea of heeding, this word means to build a hedge around it. You take care of it. Don't let anything mess up. Pay attention is the idea behind it. So the next thing we are to do is write down the commandments, and a basic explanation of what was expected for each person regarding each commandment, which seems like it's, on the face it should be really easy, right? I mean, it's like, don't kill anybody, right? Don't murder your neighbor. That seems like it should be simple, but we'll get into a little bit of that. And I just wanted to note as well the progression, that these laws are put forth. The first part is about our relationship with God, and how are we to relate with God. And what does he expect from us? And then there's one line, there's one commandment in there when it comes to our physical family. Just one. And then the rest are about how we deal with the community, our neighbors, and that sort of thing. So, yes?
I think it's important with them because that sets the tone for this whole covenant. And the whole concept of a natural covenant doesn't make sense if you don't know and appreciate who the greater party is.
Yes.
So if I tell you, Mark, I have established to do this, you go, funny. Why? Why should I listen to you, and why should I do what you do? And you would be right. But with God, he does.
But that's what much of the world is doing today. I don't see God, so I don't need to do anything you're saying. I am Jehovah your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Very good. So, what's that first commandment? In verse 7.
Don't have any little g gods before me.
You shall have no gods, you shall have no other gods before me. What does that mean? Today, We know idolatry is silly. We're so lucky. We're blessed that we're not as so superstitious as in a society that's so superstitious to assign a God to everything that happens in nature and everything that happens in the world, and think that our president or our governor is a God himself. We're not foolish that way. We're educated to a certain degree, right? We know better. If you've been raised in the church, you know better anyway. So, what does it mean to have a God before Jehovah God? Randy?
Going along, trust anything more than me.
Okay. Like what? What can we trust more than God?
Money.
That was my first thought. Why is that? Cameron?
Build anything else for,
Okay.
like priority.
Family? Wow. Okay.
People inherit, but I do think they look to the government and to
Yes.
or they
Right.
put their trusts in the elected officials to
Right.
solve their problems.
Yeah, and we've seen that proliferate with the removal of God from the culture as much as people have been trying to do that. It gets down to faith again, and you don't have to say that word faith. I like the idea of what do you trust more than anything. The CEV says, and I thought it was a little more accurate. It said, "Do not worship any god except me." Where you might think, well, if I worship other gods, as long as I don't put it before Jehovah God, I'm okay, right? Somebody might argue, but that's not what it's saying. Don't walk away and think I said that's what it says. That's not what it says. The idea and concept behind it is something that's right in the presence of God himself. In other words, where is God? Well, we know he's in heaven. But where is he right now? Well, we think he's present with us. Well, Robinson's right here, right? He's in us. And that's the concept. That's the main idea is, here's what you need to do with me. Don't do that with anybody else. Yes.
And the Israelites before shows up again here. I am
Yes.
the Lord your God. And the
Right.
whole concept of I am is that God is the only
The only
thing
one.
that everything else is created. Everything else flows from God, or that God is the only thing or person or being or whatever that just exists inherently. And so when you look at it that way, family, money, sports, government, that just falls really flat compared to
Right.
the eternal God.
Right. That becomes their main prayer, and we'll get into that next week, about God being one. He's God and he's one. And he gets into it throughout the Old Testament. You're worshiping a piece of wood that was carved by a man, and you're not worshiping me. And when I think of it within this context of just nothing in front of God, I think of how insulted God had to be when, in this physical manifestation of things, you had a temple, or you had a place where you would worship God, and then you would put other idols, and they are before God in this physical manifestation. Today, we know a lot. It's more of that psychological thing about what's in here. What am I putting anything before him? Am I making anything more important than him? And we'll get into the importance of how the physical manifestation of showing our God's importance to us next week, or maybe next week. Okay, anybody want to add anything to that? What's the next one here? And this kind of extends the thought. Don't make any idols. So, you shall have no other gods before me. Don't make any idols. It almost seems superfluous to say that. But until you read the rest of the Old Testament, because we know that even up until the time of Christ, up until not that long ago, really, idolatry was rampant in the world, around the world. I mean, people who, in the Americas, people in Europe, all around the world, idolatry was just rampant. And so when you consider that, it makes sense that God would extend the thought of not having any other God. Not only any other God, but definitely don't make any images of them and bow down to them. Tamara. Yeah. It maybe should have reminded them of what they did with the calf, right? Here's your God. He's a cow. Randy?
Well, kind of, so it says don't start.
Lisa?
Well, they had no idea of an image they could create that would.
Yes. Because why? Well, because it's logical. I'm using my own brain power and my own logic to tell you that there's no such thing if you can't see it. Kay, and then there was another hand. Kay, and then Betty.
Well, people make pictures of Jesus. That just
Okay.
slays me.
He was a hippie. Maybe he wasn't. I would imagine he didn't look anything like most of what we see. Betty?
Oh, I just love that. It's just that.
And there you go. What are you acting on? You're acting on your own conscience on that, right? And you know how to do what we're going to talk about in chapter 6. How do you love God with all your heart? Well, I just give this part up. I don't do that. Danny and then Robin.
So, on that point, carved image is a fairly technical term. And I think part of how we see that is that later on in the construction of a tabernacle and a temple and these other things, God directs them to of carvings and metalwork and so a carved image is a term kind of like what you see later. It's not necessarily the thing, but it's a term used to describe an idolatrous object or location. And so the high places, the groves, the carved images to those places, and which is probably a point worth making.
Well, do all to the glory of the Lord, right? I mean, and that again is, how, loving God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Understanding everything is in the context of our God being who He is. Robin?
If your eye causes you to.
It's interesting, yeah. We do see a lot of things that, I would say this, if there's anything that this pandemic has exposed, it's that the experts aren't that great all the time. They know a lot of things. I'm not saying they don't know anything, and I'm not saying they're not being scientific. I'm just saying as much as we know, there's a lot that we don't know. And that, it's okay to listen to people and understand that maybe they can help you. But even in these situations, our trust is always in God. Okay. Yeah, I just noted that they had fallen quite a ways from the faith that Abraham had. How do we know Abraham was faithful? God told him to do something, and he did it, and he led his whole house that way. Well, now we have, if he had 300, now we're talking about 3 million. So we're not talking, this isn't an apples to apples thing. But they had wandered off from that sort of faith, where whatever God said, they just trusted Him and did it. And so they had been the issue, the way I was seeing it was, they had been assimilated into a culture where they just had gods for everything, and this is what they had become. And when we read through the Old Testament, they have issues with it throughout the Old Testament. It's just was too much of a lure. And it's not to say, look at what they did. It's to say, look at what's capable for any human to do when it comes to God. Any one of us can allow something in our lives to be before God. Okay. Here's an interesting one. Anybody want to add to that before we get to the next one? You shall not take the name of Jehovah your God in vain, for Jehovah will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. So here's, again, the importance of words and the importance of what is said, which is equitable to the things that we do. So what is the person to do in this case? It's pretty simple, right?
Do it every day.
Yes, that's true. Right. How is that? How does that take God's name in vain? Because it becomes just commonplace. And that, right? Is that what you mean? I mean, that's how I see it. God is not commonplace. God is above anything common. I've never thought of that. Oh, my mom. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Think about what we say. Danny.
God's character, his commandments, his covenant, any of that, and making it common or not important is taking that name in vain. And so when we start very loosely throwing around things like, I know that's what the Bible says, but I don't agree, or but things are different now. Now we have taken God's holy commandment and we've made it common and subject, and that's a form of taking God's.
Okay. Lisa?
I think it's sufficient.
Yeah. Well,
It gives you the idea of the seriousness of it.
yeah.
Well and punished.
We
The way you treat God's name.
we see the example with Moses, right? God says, you and Aaron take the rod and go talk to the rock this time. And now he can't go into the land. Why? Because he didn't revere God. And in that one instance, that was something that he did. And this is something that we do when we speak. That's how important words are again. Randy.
When you make God,
Okay.
they had made God completely common by putting all the idols in the temple. This God, you can worship Baal, you can worship God, and you can go worship.
Yeah, I think he's going to answer that problem in chapter 6. It's the sense of desolating, making something evil, or destructive, using God's name in a destructive way, or ruining his name, morally not holding him up. And as Randy said, in a figurative sense, it's making him an idol. I just wanted to add that it just covers something that Moses has seen already. And this is something we talk about quite a bit when we study the Exodus and Numbers. And the people like to complain. And it wasn't just complaining, it was accusing God of things. This covers blasphemy, which is, if we're going to accuse God of anything, that's blasphemy. This is something that we see most atheists do. They're more than willing to just blaspheme God's name, saying, he's not, what God would let this happen? There can't be a God. And there's all sorts of things that they say or complain about. And this is what Moses is trying to combat. You need to just leave God's name where it belongs. And in that room, the room's in your head, and the room's in the tabernacle, it needs to only be God and nothing else. And revere it and understand that he doesn't say it, but he's trying to grow their faith.